Episode of the AI to ROI podcast. On today's episode, I am joined by Stephan Bajaio, co-founder and CEO of VibeLogic. We're going to be covering three primary topics, and I'm sure we're going to dive deep into all of them. First is the value of understanding your web intelligence presence. Second, why starting any marketing investment of AI? It means starting with understanding your baseline is a critical first step. And third, the importance of control groups and measuring the impact of AI for marketing investments. So with that, Stephan, please take a moment to give a brief overview of your journey to becoming a guest here on the AI to ROI podcast.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Ray. As you said, I'm Stephan Bajaio, and you pronounced it phenomenally. So congratulations. Not a simple task. But now that we've taken the hardest task out of the conversation, let's get into a little bit of my background. So I have 25 years of experience in digital and online. I helped put some of the first e-commerce sites on the web in 99, 2000. So I was part of the dot-com boom bust. I've had my corporate take at Yahoo and Time Inc. and others. I would help found a company called Conductor for about 14 years. We were originally a link building company in SEO that then became a SaaS company. When SaaS became the hot thing, we were bought by WeWork, bought ourselves back from WeWork, so we're one of the only companies that survived that. And then later, we would be valued at about $500 million. I'd take a walk, become a CMO of another software company, and then decide that it was finally time to build my own thing from scratch, aka VibeLogic, and here I am. During this entire process, I've been in customer service, I've been charged with professional services, I've been leading SEO teams, growing them, evangelism, funny term too, but I've had a lot of different roles, different hats, and I've had the pain and the pleasure of working with some of the largest brands in the world. So I'm happy to bestow any thoughts, failures, lessons I can to your audience along the way.
Well, Stephan, thank you for being here. You've got a very broad and deep experience base, and boy, you brought back memories, because my first job in Silicon Valley was I headed up e-commerce at Netscape starting in 1995, and that's when people weren't talking about the digital journey. They were talking about, could we get the physical world onto the web, right? Before we even knew about digital journeys and marketing. But that's what we're going to talk about today, because you said something during the when we first met, and it really made me think that today's digital journey of our target buyers, it's really, they're not living in a journey, they're traversing, or living in a channel, they're traversing multiple channels on an ongoing basis, so you want to meet them where they are, right? That's a basic concept we talked about.
Absolutely.
But you mentioned this term called web intelligence presence, and it sounds like you think it's really important to understand where you are in that kind of measurement. So what is it and why is it important?
Sure. So it's honestly not that we needed more acronyms, right? WPI, Web Presence Intelligence, is this concept that I honestly have been talking about in one way, shape, or form since 2012. What was really interesting, it comes from SEO and the background of SEO. And really, when you think about what is SEO at an enterprise organization, it is a hope and a prayer that you can convince your content team to go along with writing and producing the content you need. They are going to say that their artistic sensibilities don't allow for the use of your keywords. At least it used to be a lot more of that. The dev team, it's take a ticket and pray, right? I got to put in a Jira ticket and hope I can do something. And frankly, I should be able to make a change like a title tag or something simplistic on the site, put in a link, do this, do that. But unfortunately, maybe in the structures, confines of these types of websites, you're handcuffed and you need to take a number and wait, right? So not to mention PR, communications, marketing, all want to use particular terms, product names, things, crazy terms, all this stuff, and it's, can you SEO this for me? And so in that world, right, the SEO didn't have a lot of capability to be successful. So as I started to think about that, I started saying, well, hold on a second. I mean, we're trying to be what shows up, right? Makes sense. Half the time I could see the problem in that strategy was We either didn't deserve to show up because we just thought that we would play with keywords and we would show up, which wasn't really justifiable. Could we really solve rather than just sell? Did we really have the backbone to provide the value? And then the other part was like, who else is showing up? Now, the traditional SEO version of that is like, they're all competitors. Outrank them, outrank them, outrank them. But what about when they weren't? What about when they were a publisher? Okay, are you really good enough to compete with one of the world's biggest publishers? Can you beat Entrepreneur, Forbes, which we could argue is not as much a publisher as it used to be? Affiliate is more like it. All these other governmental websites, potential partners, all these things would show up in the landscape of the results, what I call supply, right? I had to break it down to like executive language, right? Executive language is supply and demand. Demand is what goes into the search bar. No one lies to their search bar. Today, that search bar may also be the AI prompt, right? And then the response is everything you get back is supply. Yes, of course, everyone wants to be everything on the shelf, but the reality is if you walked into a store, a Best Buy, anywhere, and all you saw, Target, maybe not even B2C, right, B2B, and all you were was always the answer, do you think that that would really be a great experience for the user? Of course not. So then the question is, when someone goes and looks and tries to solve something, and they're given a bunch of answers, are you influencing where those opinions are being made? Whether it's a Reddit thread, a publisher who may write the next article, the author itself, the advertisements on that publisher, a potential partner who's showing up, right? They might be in a secondary industry to yours and they're having a part of the conversation. So the question really becomes, are you aware of what your audience ends up seeing and what they're being told before you decide where to place your bets?
It's interesting because it's hard enough in the old digital journey where it was not limited, but search was a primary channel. But now we got this new thing called large language models, and everyone's talking about AEO and GEO and showing up where those, number one, where the models are getting the reference citations, and then where customers are searching on AI. So how do you go about measuring your web presence today, knowing that LLMs are the future?
So I would argue a few things there. One, LLMs in the current format, I don't believe are the future. And that's a whole other argument we can talk about. I don't believe the best utilization of AI is a chatbot and or a responsive reactive thing. I think the true way we're going will be proactive. There's no way we continue the same model we're going down of humanity where there are just multiple inputs that keep going faster and faster. Our brains and our own sanities, as you can see in anxiety rates, depression rates, ad blockers, filters on emails, people taking digital detox, is all because there are too many inputs and there's too much noise and not enough signal, right? And figuring out signal from noise is an incredibly hard thing to do. So until these actually come in and truly help is not another search engine masked as something different, which is the way we're treating LLMs today, as some kind of like additional better version of a search engine because it does string betting, so to speak, and knows the last thing so there's context for the next thing, or knows the 15 last things you did, which technically Google already did, but they were doing it by terms, not by prompts. So the inputs of personalization weren't as good. That's not really what we need. Like, we need the thing that understands all that stuff and then helps make the decisions for you in terms of what the best thing is for you based on what they know about you and the answers. So to your point, it doesn't mean that it won't still be interpreting whatever that tech is, right? I still think this is the version of AI. Like, and we're getting excited about it like we used to back in the day. But our screens were loading pretty damn slow, Ray, if you remember. Like, the SVGA monitor version of this stuff. Like, we're not at the streaming version of AI. And so we're going to get there. It's not going to be the shape, ways, and forms that we are looking at today, because no one can predict what that will ultimately look like. But what I can predict is that right now any of these systems require an understanding of you, You meaning not just you personally, but literally your website. Your website sends signals, says things about you. It is the most in control aspect of your business. If you don't think about what I call the 4 Ps, point, paragraph, page, or pass. So, what does that mean? If you have a bullet point on a page, is that really, you chose to highlight a word and or phrase. It's probably really important. Does that mean it's so important it doesn't require a paragraph? And if it's so important it requires a paragraph, does it not really require a page? So what you're doing is you're leaving to interpretation a lot more every time you go to the most minimal aspect. So I'm not saying you have to build a page for every single potential thing on your site, but if you do an audit of a site, you'd be amazed how many times people don't, A, put the actual thing they solve for. It's just a bunch of marketing blurbs and messages, but they don't actually say the name, the thing they're selling, the thing they solve. They don't put the problems there. They don't put the problems in the terms of the consumer, right? And the way they express themselves. They put their own fancy languages with a lot of verbiage that's never been used by a consumer before, or it's aspirational trying to get them to do it. So the point being, all of this stuff, right, is very much in your control as a business. What interprets you is not where you should be focusing most of your efforts right now, because that's going to change at a rate you can't keep up with. But what you can do is try and ground it in a sense of reality so that when you are cited, when you are recognized, when other people try to understand what's about you, at least your core has been defined. You'd be amazed how many businesses don't have that baseline, that core of what they are, and so their pricing gets defined by a third-party website and it gets cited in the LLMs, or their products and solutions, their features get misinterpreted because they never claimed the ownership over it. That's the part that's like, and I'll bring it back to one quick thing. How many of you have taken decades of time like I have investing into LinkedIn? I know a guy whose entire LinkedIn, unbeknownst to him, and he's still trying to figure out why, was shut down. That means all the work he ever did, posting, creating relationships, networking, doing all that stuff, gone. Gone. He has no access. He doesn't have the files. And while he tries his best to go find someone at LinkedIn that'll listen, that is not an owned asset. His owned asset is his website. So providing more time and effort and thinking more around your own web property, number one, before worrying about the intelligence that interprets it, is a number one. Then you can worry about everyone else.
Yeah, I'm going to push back on that. You know a hell of a lot more about this than I do.
Sure.
But to think that your website and your own digital content is still by far the most important thing in this LLM world, it seems like understanding where the LLMs are getting their content, their models are being trained upon, and why you show up, because 28 people mentioned you on Reddit or 150 people mentioned you in a Forbes, article over the last 2 years, it's going to become more and more important. But it seems like you're doubling down on what's been important ever since we had HTTP and web search.
Because it still is. I mean, when you look at the numerics behind this stuff, okay, are we seeing traffic being driven by LLMs? I just challenged a $3 billion company's marketing team to tell me what percentage of their traffic they believe was being driven by LLMs. Do you know what some of the numbers that were thrown out were? 20%, 30%. Someone went as far as 50%.
I've heard those numbers in research.
Yes. Do you know what it actually was? 1%.
No.
1%. So did it have a high conversion rate? Absolutely. But only 1% of traffic was being actually driven by LLMs. Now, that doesn't mean that people aren't doing the research, finding their answer there, and then going direct to the website. Absolutely could be and is for sure happening. But as a source of traffic to a website right now, infinitesimally small comparative to a search engine or other mechanisms. Now, huge potential influence, agreed. The thing that happens here is marketers in general get shiny object syndrome. I can tell you for a fact, because SEO died more times than I can count. Alexa came out with voice search and Google Echo and all the rest of that stuff, Google Home. How many people are currently today making recipes to make sure they rank in that? No.
Not many.
Right. But that was supposed to kill search. Now, I'm not saying AI isn't incredibly valuable and powerful. I'm just saying the version you're looking at, like voice search, is not the best example of what it's going to be. So rather than chasing all that, first thing you need to do is control what you can control. The second thing, to your point, is what else is being cited. Not why does it cite it, but what else is being cited? What else is coming up? If that Reddit thread comes up, whether you're being mentioned 50 times or not, it's the fact that that Reddit thread is constantly mentioned as an answer or a citation, not just in LLMs, but also in SEO, which, by the way, I don't know if you've seen studies on this, but Reddit are actually far more referenced in Google. No wonder, considering they bought the data for 65 million, which was a steal for them, and I would say not a clean negotiation when you own someone else's traffic. And LLMs, very rarely, actually, an infinitesimally small amount of time does Reddit actually come up as an answer so at least ChatGPT, I believe, does not trust Reddit. Just doesn't. And I understand that. It's more susceptible. It's a little bit of like poll the audience kind of thing. And while that was always a good, on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, always a good thing to bet on, you notice whenever you poll the audience, you usually got the right answer. But in this case, there's a lot of back and forth on it. So the point isn't like, oh, this is the one thing. To your point earlier, this is not the channel. This is not social owns Reddit, therefore, and paid owns display, so therefore, or PR owns publishers, so the authorship, and we got to stop looking at it that way. And I know that's scary, but that's the version of the future we need to be thinking more about, which is follow the user through their life cycle, not through the channel they go through. If they go through a channel, right? And AI makes, by the way, marketers more effective. A generalist can do a lot more in any given channel using AI to help them do that as a generalist. So being a specific, I only deal in email, I won't deal in anything else, seems to be going the way of the dodo, and more, I only deal in net new acquisition for people who fall in this category.
But
not only that, but I follow them all the way through to post-purchase, and I understand that. So it's not a funnel, it's an hourglass. And when we go back to sell them again, or upsell them, or cross-sell them, I'm charged with that because I understand every kind of point they might have seen, not just on my website, but on the web. And so I have a sense of their opinions, what formulates them, what they care about, what they respond to, and that makes me a better marketer to actually help bring them back into the hourglass again, if that makes sense.
But Stephan, here's the challenge I see, because about 50% of our listeners here are heads of finance.
Sure.
About 30% in the go-to-market side, marketing and sales. Mm-hmm. And this word attribution, which I hate, but we got to address it. Because at the end of the day, when that CMO says, hey, I want to invest an additional 20 million in my AEO strategy.
Sure.
The CFO is going to say, well, how do you know to invest there versus double down on your SEO strategy or invest more in your community development? I'm just making things up.
Yeah, of course.
How do you determine if I invested 10 million in AI and marketing, how do you really know the return if you don't have attribution?
Okay. So one, I think all companies, this is let's call it a watershed moment, even though this should have happened irrespective of whether or not AI was in the picture or not. You all need to go back and look at your KPIs, right? We throw the terms KPIs around very loosely in general in companies, right? I like to talk about are we really looking at things from the perspective of if something is documented or managed, right? Managed means you're actually taking those numbers and they're impacting something else, some other decision, some other, versus measured is just like, we know X.
Right.
We got this amount of traffic. Wonderful. What does that mean? Yeah. What do we take from that? An attribution isn't a measurement. It's a consequence of a measurement, right? And so we don't think about it in that way. We don't set what those consequences are. We just wait to measure and then decide what the consequence should be, versus trying to the act of attributing properly, which most companies don't know how to do because, let's face it, oftentimes they don't have an amazing record of the past data to make those decisions. Not to mention their market changes. the mechanism they're using, like AI, is completely net new to them. So how do you do that? You have to ground it back to some stuff you know and work your way backwards, right? Work your way from, we know, okay, we want sales. Got it. But if we can't get a sale, what's the second best thing to that?
Pipeline.
And then if we can't, what's the third best thing to that? Okay, so these are all things, and how do we measure those things? Okay, and so if they were to go up, how would I attribute that to the source that caused it? And going through that exercise, backing into it, so that and I say, don't go throw. I'm not telling anyone to go throw $20 million at AEO, GEO, AIO today. I think that's a fool's errand. The only guys that made money during the gold rush are the ones who sold you the pans and the picks. Okay? Like the odds of you hitting it big there is low. Where you need to be spending your time is taking the insights, the value, the stuff, the gold, frankly, you've been sitting on in pay dirt in your own business. Look inwards and go find that stuff. You want to know how to get a better renewal rate? Use AI and go audit the hell out of your customer logs, your sales calls, your renewal conversations, your. All that stuff is sitting there for the taking.
Well,
But 9 times out of 10, companies haven't taken any of the time to do that. Now, how does that relate back to getting people into the beginning of the life cycle? Sure. Well, the learnings from here need to now be applied to the content you create to acquire the individuals. And not just, that's the other thing too. We build content based on the actual channel we expected them to come through. Like people will argue with me, well, if I build this article, is it going to rank? And you know what I tell them? I don't give a crap if it ranks. Now they look at me like I'm insane because I'm charged with SEO for them. But I say, what if it ends up being the #1 newsletter piece you have? And it connected so well, but the gods at Google didn't let it rank, or maybe AI didn't pick it up the way you wanted. Does that mean it's an erroneous piece of content, not worth anything, and we should throw it in the trash bin? No. You don't know the mechanism that will ultimately hit. But you do know that building and taking the authority from your business and exposing it in the best way possible, using the wisdom of the folks you took years to hire, and using their wisdom and showing that as a company, that's not going to hurt you, right?
Stephan, so we talked about understanding your baseline. So it seems
Yes.
like this is all about how do you really expose and understand, including the context of what you've done historically and what value has it delivered before you make decisions about the future. Do you have a framework to help companies do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's what I affectionately, and probably raises more wristwatches than eyebrows. I don't know. Sometimes more eyebrows, to be honest. What I call the fat guy photo. You're old enough to remember Trim Spa commercials. Remember they show you the guy before taking the Trim Spa stuff. And then afterwards, he's like got perfect abs and he's all, And if you don't have the pre, it's really hard to prove that what you did actually got you the outcome, right? So, case in point, understanding all your channels online, what they're driving, how they drive, and where your blind spots are is #1 for any business before you start taking on any initiative. If you've had initiatives that work, I want to sit down and talk about why. I want to understand what were the key aspects of those that were successful and why they were successful and why you deemed them successful. How did you already attribute things, right? Because if we have a model, we should probably bring it back. Every company's different. I've been in companies that tell you paid doesn't work. I'm like, really? I don't know how Google made trillions of dollars doing that. I have other companies who will tell you email is God's gift. And other ones will tell you, I can't even get a response rate on email and I can't track X, Y, or Z. So it's really the first step is an audit of what do you know and what don't you know. And then once you have that baseline, it's what are you trying, what are you building, and how do you plan to actually come out with messaging, content, and stuff. And then how will you distribute it? Because the content itself, if it's framed and built off of insight, intelligence, really good stuff, audience understanding, it's not about where you distribute it. It's about the content itself being good. As long as it's really good, now it's going to be a question of where does it land the best? What format of it works better? Is it better as a video? Is it better as a calculator? You know how many people don't use AI to create an interactive experience for their audience? I had a glossary, right? A glossary of all these technical SEO terms and how you should talk about them in real English, executive speak, not tech speak. because I found that SEO text to execs was just lost on people. Right. Now, I could have continued to just have these pages about these terms, rank. Woo, now you understand what the word canonical means. It doesn't really help, right? What have I really done? Versus I took all that information, I vibe coded with an LLM. Hey, let's talk about building a calculator that would help people, not even a calculator, but a translator that allows an SEO who's trying to use a technical term to find the alternative, correct terminology that would be more plain English exec speak. And then for an exec, that same tool, you could drop the email from your from your SEO where you don't want to admit that you're responsible for his or her channel, but you don't understand the words they're using, and all of a sudden it would say 301 redirect and then tell you what that meant, canonical, and tell you what that meant. Okay, does that literally bring me more business? No, not necessarily. Am I solving a problem that I know exists within organizations that could bring me on? Yes, it does. Is that a better format than a glossary? Hell yeah, it is, right? But we aren't taking time to look at the treasure that was sitting already in my inbox, in my, in my data set, in my website, and saying, oh, there's a better way to do this, right?
So I understand my history. I understand my blind spots.
Yes.
Right before I make the future investment, but I ultimately am going to make the future investment because I know the world is changing.
Sure.
You mentioned to me how important the utilization of control groups are as you're making those future investments to really understand what is and isn't working. Can you talk a little bit more about that in this AEO, GEO?
Yeah, and it's not just AEO, GEO. Like, I'll give you a great example, right? Oftentimes, and I don't know if you agree with this, right? How many times have you had a client or someone tell you, like, the competitor's doing it, therefore? Like,
you hear that a lot. And by the way, I train my salespeople to go in and say, by the way, based on the market research, you're doing this, but your competitors are doing that.
Of course. Now, I've had plenty of really, you know what? We're going to share no, I won't. I'll keep the name of the guilty anonymous for now, but I will talk about the industry. ERP Lifecycle Software, one of the biggest companies in the world who did that, is sitting here telling me that their marketing department no longer lets them use the term software. What? You can't use software? Nope. Don't want to use software. Why? Salesforce, competitor of theirs, put the word software and a big red slash through it. Remember when that happened back in the day? And that was their marketing message. So therefore, we've set the tone. We've set the market. That's the way it is. Okay, cool. So what do I do? And how do we talk about baseline? Well, I go take 25 terms that have software in them and those same 25 terms that have solution or some other derivative but not software. And then I show them the market share of who's showing up. And I say, if you want to take this aggressive a stance, that is perfectly fine. It's not my business to ultimately tell you one way or another unless you solicit my opinion. But you'll do it eyes wide open. So if you notice over here, you have zero visibility, and this is the amount of search volume that goes on for that, and these are the people that are showing up, and they're all your competitors and so on. And this is when we and that's software term, and this is the solutions other version where you're there sharing the space among all the others. Now, is that okay with you? And they said, no. And I said, okay. So ignorance isn't bliss, it's your competitor's market share. I've literally had customers tell me, I don't know how they were able to afford to do a Super Bowl ad. And I'm like, because they realized and flanked you in opportunities you never realized you had to take. So oftentimes you have to be very careful that the decisions you're making, and this is why I do look at what the competitors are doing, and you don't, it's not to say you should be driven only by that, right? And depends on, let's be honest, it's easy for you and I to say what should the baseline be, but all that stuff dies at the executive level. If the executive isn't the person who cares about, we don't care about the competitor, okay. Or if they're constantly maniacally driven by what a competitor's doing, you need to feed them the metrics that are going to map back to their, are you a carrot or a stick guy? Do I need to use a stick here? Do I need to use a carrot? Opportunity that has yet to be seized. If you don't keep up with the competition, right? So there are different approaches, and this is why I just want to say there is no answer. I can't tell you I know for a fact. because your business is too unique. Let's be honest. One size doesn't fit all. Spandex can fit everybody, but doesn't look good on everyone. Let's be honest. And the reality is that like you need to be a little more nuanced in your approach. So who are we trying to influence? Just like a marketer. It's funny. We always think about marketing to the customer or the prospect. You need to do just as much, if not more, marketing internally to get the actual things across the finish line. It's sad to say, but it's true. The bigger your org, the more likely that is the case.
Okay. So we're our 30 minutes are gone already.
Sorry.
We are called the AI to ROI podcast.
Yes.
So if you could just wrap up and summarize for those both CMOs and CFOs in the listening audience, as they think about AI investments in their marketing organization and marketing programs and channels, what's the best practices or advice that you leave them with that you really want to remember from this conversation?
Sure. So when it comes to AI visibility, right, which is what we focused almost 95% of this conversation around, and not using AI to make your marketers more effective, a few things about changing the dynamics of that. But when it comes to AI visibility, focus more on what you can control than chasing what you can't, right? Because your ROI there will be diversified by the channels you use the content and the assets through. Think of them as assets, think of them as intelligence, and you can decide where to place those via channel all day long, but having them is the core right now, right? Not having them is a different story. So you will impact the way the rest of the world considers you. You ultimately will, but that consideration engine keeps changing. Don't chase that right now. Make sure you've got all the gaps filled. Then the other part, right, which we didn't touch, but we can absolutely get into another time, is AI definitely has a place in marketing ops, in capability, in empowerment, right? Be careful where you deploy it and how you deploy it to ensure you're doing it in the most judicious and effective way, and ensure that what you're choosing to run it against, you already actually know the baselines and the process. I can't tell you how many times people have tried to deploy AI against something they don't fully understand, and therefore they can't fully judge whether or not they solved or didn't solve, got a better ROI or didn't. They end up spending more time analyzing the outcomes. They QA everything because they didn't know what they were supposed to get in the first place. They're using it against things they've never tried. Which is like, of course you don't know what you're going to get against something you've never tried because you haven't done it 1,000 times to judge it and say, yes, this is correct, or no, this is wrong, right? Like, so that deployment of AI and the way it gets used, you need to contextualize it. And it has tremendous, again, I do not want to be the guy who throws a wet blanket and says AI doesn't have a place in marketing. It 1,000% does. In fact, I'd say we're more on the tip of the spear of AI utilization than most parts of an organization. But, with any new technology, be careful. Your investments need to be measured, and they have to be, if you can, I'm not trying to be too risk averse, but if they can default back to what you own, what you control, then you can always, as a marketer, as a great marketer, stress and extract the ROI from those situations versus being beholden to whether or not something showed up or didn't show up in something you really don't fully control.
Yeah, you mentioned something, we didn't hit it. You know, we talked a lot about how you can impact brand and demand with AI versus operational efficiency.
Yep.
And honestly, a lot of CFOs would say, hey, if I can get more output for less input, I'm happy. And the output ultimately is revenue growth for less expenses.
Yeah, it depends on if you're trying to augment, and that's a whole other conversation we'll do another time, I promise, Ray, but like, are we trying to augment a system? Are we trying to automate a system? What are we doing to something, right? Or are we trying to create a net new system? Those are all different tasks and different things that you can't just say AI that for me, just like you can't say SEO this for me. You need to go into each one of those projects with a different mindset, a different budgeting method, and a different attribution model.
Yeah. Stephan Bajaio, co-founder and CEO of VibeLogic. Thank you so much for being my guest here on the AI and ROI podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It was a real pleasure, Ray, and thanks for trying to wrangle me and keep me to time in some way, shape, or form.
And to the listening audience, if you enjoyed the conversation, and you find real value from the discussions we have, it would mean the world to us. Go ahead and subscribe to the AI to ROI podcast or in your favorite podcasting app. Go ahead and give us that 5-star rating. Hey, and reach out to me at Ray Reich on LinkedIn and let me know other guests that you'd like to hear from. Thanks again, Stephan, and thank you to our audience.
Thanks for having me.